Hi, it's your girl Keisha, and welcome to The Authentic Life. Each episode, I'll guide you on the journey to living fully, freely, and unapologetically. Together, we'll dive into real stories, practical insights, and steps you can take to embrace your truth and show up as your most authentic self. So guess what? I am glad that you are here with me. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to The Authentic Life, the space where we explore what it really means to live fully, to live freely, and most importantly, to live unapologetically as your true self. If you're new here, I'm Keisha. I'm your host, I'm your guide, and by the end of this, I might even be your accountability partner in this journey. So whether you're tuning in from your car, your office, or your favorite cozy corner at home, your girl is just so glad that you decided to be here with her today. Now, before we dive in, I want to take a moment to thank every single person that has jumped on this authentic life journey with me. Whether you've downloaded the podcast, you've shared it with your friends, you've sent me beautiful, amazing messages, or you just tuned in to listen. You've been incredible, and I am so grateful. I am so appreciative. I am so very thankful. I never really knew what the impact would be when I started this podcast. All I knew was I had something to say. And I had been writing a newsletter for a couple of months and have released several newsletters. And I just felt like it needed another way to get out. It needed to get out to more people. And so I decided to do the podcast. And the podcast has been podcasting. And many of your messages that I've received from family members, from friends, from colleagues, and even from people I don't even really know or don't know at all have been nothing short of amazing. Your words have been confirmation that I'm on the right track and that I'm doing the right thing. If you know me and you're someone that knows me personally, you know I am all about pouring into people and building people up. And that is what I hope this podcast is and will continue to be. You all have shared how these conversations are opening your eyes, how it's changing your mindset, that even it's relatable and you can see yourself in some of the things that I've said. And it's helping you take the first steps towards living authentically. And all of that means everything to me because, again, it's doing what I hoped it would do, right? So I hope you all will continue down this journey with me because remember, this wasn't just the launch of the authentic life. It was the launch of something that just might change your life, right? Now, let's get into today's topic. Last week, we broke down the myths about what living authentically is not. We talked about perfectionism. We talked about people pleasing. We talked about shrinking ourselves. And we talked about living for the approval of others and how that traps us and keeps us from our truth, right? Well, today we're shifting gears and we're talking about something foundational to living #the authentic life, and that's boundaries. Now, let me keep it real. Boundaries are probably one of the hardest lessons I've had to learn and also is a continuous development space for me. It is definitely a journey and not a final destination because depending on the person or the situation, I have gone from really healthy boundaries to letting people overstep them completely. So, when I think about my family and my friends and even work, I have let guilt make decisions for me. There have been times where I really didn't want to do a thing and really didn't want to do something or really didn't want to go anywhere, but I let guilt talk me into saying yes, knowing good and well I wasn't trying to do that or not trying to go to that place. I have overcommitted to prove that I'm a team player, right? May it be at work or even in some of my dynamics in my relationships. I've overcommitted just to prove to you that I belong in this space, right? So hopefully those are things that sound familiar, and it's a work in progress for me. It has definitely been a game of double dutch when I think about how I function and operate in trying to manage my boundaries. So that's why today we are diving deep into #the boundary life. We will explore what boundaries really are. We'll talk about the cost of living without them. And then I'm going to give you some practical real life strategies to start setting them in ways that feels doable and you don't feel the guilt that goes along with that. Plus, I'll be sharing some gems from one of my favorite books, Set Boundaries, Find Peace by Nedra Tawwab, along with my own learn lessons, right? So grab your coffee, grab your tea, grab your glass of wine, or maybe even a notebook or whatever keeps you grounded. And let's get into this. So let's start with, what are boundaries at their core? For me, boundaries are the limits we set to protect our time, protect our peace, protect our energy, and most importantly, protect our emotional well-being. They are absolutely not walls to keep people out. In my opinion, they're actually bridges that guide others on how to engage with us in ways that align with our values. Now, if you listen to the first full episode, #TheAuthenticLife, I asked you all to do a little activity, and that was to reflect on your values. I asked you, what are the 5 things you value in your professional life? That's the way you collaborate with colleagues, or maybe it's the respect you give and receive at work. Then I asked you to think about, what are the 5 things you value in your personal relationships? This could be trust, honesty, transparency, open and effective communication, or simply shared experiences with family, friends, or romantic partners. Now, here's the truth. It's almost impossible for you to set meaningful boundaries without first knowing what you value. You can't align boundaries with something you have yet to define. So, if you didn't do the activity, that's okay. That's all right. It's cool. Just pause and take some time to reflect now, because the hope is that everything we're doing, everything we're talking about is a building block, right? And each episode is layering onto the last to ultimately help create a roadmap for us to live more authentically, right? So go back and do that activity if you didn't do that activity, so that when you start setting these boundaries, you know what you are aligning it to. Now, boundaries come in all shapes and sizes, just like us, right? So I want to break that down for you. So there are 6 types of boundaries that I want us to think about. And as I'm talking about them, I want you to think about what type of boundaries you have in those spaces. So the first one is around physical boundaries. This involves your personal space and your physical needs. So are you comfortable with hugging? Do you like to be in close proximity to people? Are you someone that needs physical affection? Like, I love physical touch, affection, all the things. Are you someone that needs that in your dynamics, right? Or are you someone that needs 6 feet? Give me some space. Back up. You all in my personal space. I take a breath, you get half of it. See, I'm the one, I want you to have half my breath and I want half of yours. So another conversation though. The next one is emotional boundaries. These help you protect your feelings and manage your emotional energy, right? This is about those vibes that we be talking about. Everybody positive vibes, good energy that everybody want, right? So this is really about who and what drains you, who and what energizes you. When you know what your emotional boundaries are, that helps you navigate that type of stuff, right? The third one is around time. And is, what are your time boundaries? These are how you spend your time. Maybe it's saying no to unnecessary meetings, or just taking some time for you, carving out some personal time for you to practice self-care, right? The next one is relationship boundaries. This is one I think many of us struggle with. These define acceptable behaviors in your interactions with other people, like your family, like your friends, like your romantic partners, your colleagues. How do you want to be treated? Our favorite thing. What are those non-negotiables for you in that dynamic? What are the things that is like, yeah, I'm not doing that. We not doing that. I can't do that. Right? The next one is around your work boundaries. This focuses on your availability, your work hours, how much of yourself you're pouring into your job, how much you're giving to your job. What does that balance look like for you? Work boundaries and relationship boundaries, I think, are the 2 most challenging ones for us to balance. But I think those are the ones that probably have some of the greatest impact on us, because our majority of us are working and we have to people with the people on a regular basis, right? So maintaining relationships is something we do all the time. So to me, while all 6 are things that we potentially are struggling with, those 2, we probably struggle with maintaining healthy boundaries in those spaces, right? But nonetheless, the last one is around material boundaries. And this is really about how you share or not share your possessions and your resources, like your money, stuff like that. So those are the 6 type of boundaries that you need to begin to think about. And I want you to write in your notebook for each type of boundary. Do you feel like you have healthy boundaries or not, right? And make this a yes or no question, right? Because we like to do yes, no, maybe so, coulda, woulda, shoulda. When it's just a no, no, it's a no. It's a hard no. It's a sentence. No is a sentence. No, period, right? And so take some time in your notebook and really think about what your boundaries look like in each area. So now let's address a common misconception that boundaries are selfish, right? Some people feel like, hey, when I set up some type of boundary, I'm being selfish, but boundaries are not selfish. And because so many people think boundaries are selfish, that leaves us in a place of feeling guilty. And many of us feel guilty when we set boundaries because we're worried it's taking something away from other people, right? But boundaries are not about withholding anything. They're actually about protecting your peace, protecting your energy, protecting your emotional well-being. And if we don't have them, you risk pouring from an empty cup. And let's be honest, you can't pour into others if your cup is always empty. But that's something that we try to do all too often, right? Many of us are pourers into people. That's something that we thrive off of. And if I were to think about myself, I really feel like that's why I was put on this earth, was to pour into people. And it shows so much in some of my boundaries that I have, specifically in my relationship and my work boundaries. I will feel no matter what my job is, no matter what it is, my job is to pour into people. And that's just how I'm built. And that's just who I am. But a lot of times I'm pouring from an empty cup. So one thing I'm going to try to do is kind of highlight when I'm going to talk about something personal, right? And so we're going to call these transparency moments, or we're going to call them TMs. And this is the time in which I'm going to share something personal, right? And kind of go through this. So my transparency moment is really about how I think I mentioned at the beginning of this, if I think about the many things in hashtag the authentic life I need to work on, boundaries is the place that I double dutch in, right? So I have good ones, I have healthy ones sometimes, and healthy ones sometimes I don't, right? So in my transparency moment, it really comes from the place of like the perception that people have of me, right? So I am viewed as like this person with all of this strength, right? Miss Independent. Even though I have no desire to be Miss Independent, I need a man. I want a man, all the things, right? So it's not a desire to be Miss Independent, but I think that is the perception that many people have of me, that I'm strong, I'm the strong friend, I'm the strong colleague. So if something is wrong, that is who we call, because she's the fixer. She can fix it, or if she can't fix it, she can find someone who can fix it, or she can help me fix it, or she can talk me through fixing it. And so it really puts you into a position of having to uphold that perception that people have of you. And this is a lot of times, this is a perception that people have of me before they even ever experience me, right? I always got it. I have it together, put together, right? I went to lunch with a girlfriend, or went to dinner with some friends. And I think I talked about this in my previous podcast, but it's a possibility I did not. And she was just like, Keisha, you good? You okay? I said, yeah. She was like, you sure? I said, yeah. She said, it's okay if you're not. I said, yeah, I know. She was like, because you put up such a strong front, and you always are there for people, and you're always like this strong presence that, I want you to know that it's okay, that if you're not okay, right? So when in my transparency moment, and me really thinking about, me and my boundaries, this is a journey for me, and definitely not a final destination, because that is something that I use the analogy of double dutch because with certain dynamics, I am double dutching when it comes to my boundaries. And it really goes back to that me being a pour into people, that I believe that I was put here to build people up, to help you get to whatever your purpose is, because I feel like I operate in my purpose and it's my duty to help you get there. But the issue is in me pouring into everybody's cup, and to me maintaining the image of being the person with all the strength, the person that doesn't, people think I don't have issue or deal with things. That leaves me in a place of being empty sometimes. And I'm not always replenished in the way that I pour. And I don't have an expectation that I am replenished in the way that I pour. But being strong all the time and having to maintain that strength makes it hard to set boundaries sometimes. You always feel obligated to show up, to give. And a lot of times it's at my own expense. I'm doing stuff I really don't want to do. I don't want to disappoint the people around me. I'm trying to maintain this thought that you have of me. Generally it's a subconscious thing. I'm almost certain it's a subconscious thing, but nonetheless, I'm doing it and it becomes exhausting. It becomes a lot. And I'll admit I've had seasons where I, again, double dutch with my boundaries, meaning sometimes I have really firm boundaries and healthy boundaries. And then there's other times I let stuff slide. But here's what I've learned. You don't have to live in that kind of cycle. Boundaries are something that you practice, and it's not a one-time decision. It's something that's a work in progress for me, right? However, when you are in a space where you are always pouring into people and you don't want to disappoint people, and if we think about it, that's where we begin to shrink ourselves, right? That's where that shrinking yourself comes into play. All of it ultimately ties together, because that shrinking and that feeling you have to be and do for everybody comes from a place of not really having healthy boundaries, or not really setting your own standards of how you're going to interact and engage with the people around me. So if you're thinking about, when you should begin thinking about boundaries and setting those boundaries, you really would want to focus on certain areas of your life that you feel like you're struggling. So we talked about those 6 types of boundaries. I know work and relationship are probably my 2 areas that I don't necessarily always have firm boundaries in, right? And so I have to begin to figure out a way to manage that, or I have figured out a way to try to manage that, right? But that's something that you need to start doing, right? So that's my transparency moment. Let's practice what it actually looks like, right? In action. So if you just start out by practicing these 3 simple phrases, right? You can say, I'm not available for that, or that doesn't work for me, or you know what, let me get back to you on that. Will that be okay? Or just simply saying, I'm just not going to be able to do that. Write those down, save them in your phone, use them in situations where the stakes are low and you don't feel like if you made one of those comments, it's going to cause an issue or be a problem, right? So over time, you'll feel as though you are beginning to embrace boundaries. The more that you practice it, the more that you do utilize it in low stake situations, you'll begin to feel empowered to understand that, hey, you're honoring your truth. And it's not just about setting boundaries. It's about being okay with the boundaries that you set. And I think that's where we struggle. I think we know how to set boundaries. I know how to set boundaries. We know what boundaries are. I know exactly what my boundaries are. But some cases, we just feel bad about the boundaries we're setting with the people that we're setting, or we go through all of these different things in our lives. And if I set this boundary, or if I do this thing, what is going to happen if I do that? And sometimes we get lost in that. Or we get in a place of fear of loss of access to something, that if I don't do this, or if I set this boundary, what is going to be the repercussion of that? And I think that's where the self-awareness and really doing some self-reflection on who you are and all of the people that you have in your life and the dynamics you have with those people. And do those people bring out the best version of you? Or do they bring out that watered down version of you where you don't have boundaries and you don't say all the things that you want to say and you don't say no and you don't protect your energy and you don't protect your peace? So thinking about boundaries in action, I recently was going to do something for some folks, right? And I was going back and forth. Nobody asked me to do this now. This was just something that I was going to do because I'm a nice person and I do nice things. I do little bitty things all the time. I can be extra at times. And so this was something nice that I wanted to do. At least that was the idea I had in my mind when I originally came up with the thing that, hey, I want to do this. But then the more I thought about it, it was like, yeah, no, you really don't want to do this. So why are you doing this? And why do you continue to do things that you don't really want to do? Why do you continue to overextend yourself? These are all the questions that are going on in my head, right? So this was a DIY project. So I go to the store to buy the items for the DIY project, even though I went back and forth for a couple of days. Keisha, gonna do this? You're not gonna do this? Because I didn't have a lot of time to get this done. And so when I get to the store to purchase the stuff, while I'm in the store, I'm just looking, window shopping. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not doing this. Wait a minute. Why am I doing this? I didn't want to do it. And honestly, if I'm going to keep it a whole buck and y'all want to get inside my mind, if I did do it, it probably wouldn't have been appreciated anyway. Not by all. And there's never an expectation that anything I do comes with any accolades or anything like that, because I just do the things that I want to do. But what I had to ask myself, which made me ask myself, and it wasn't just about this thing that I was doing for these people. I think in the time that I was thinking about it and just the time that I am in my life, I'm in a place of assessment. And it just was like this is not the only thing that I overextend myself for. So why am I putting so much time and energy into something, right? What am I hoping to get out of doing this? What am I hoping to get out of overextending myself? Am I overextending myself to prove, or what am I overextending myself to prove, right? And so really thinking about that. And then I just came to the decision, you know what? Yeah, I'm not doing that. That's a hard no for me. And it felt good and it felt freeing. And the thing that I was going to do for them, I did for myself. So for me, it's really about the beauty of boundaries allows you to show up authentically without burning out. Boundaries are not about just protecting you. They are also about helping you build healthier relationships with the people in your life, may it be professional or personal. So if I overextend myself and other people see me constantly overextending myself, they're not going to have a problem asking me to overextend myself, because I just showed them that I don't have a boundary when it comes to that. If transparency and honesty and open, effective communication are things that I value, but then when I interact and engage with you, that's not what I get from you, but we still interacting and engaging, I'm teaching you that I don't have healthy boundaries. So when we think about boundaries and we think about having boundaries and putting boundaries in place, that's just not about protecting yourself. It's really about helping you build healthier relationships with the people in your life. Because ultimately doing that shows them how to engage with you in a way that respects you, that respects your time, that respects your energy, and ultimately respects your values and the things that you value. So when you set boundaries, you are creating a bridge, baby, not a barrier. And if someone can't respect those boundaries, that's a sign that you need to be reassessing their place in your life. Boundaries are about self-awareness. It's about taking a good look at your relationships and your surroundings, not just about your good and your bad qualities. It's also about looking at your relationships and your surroundings and the good and bad qualities of those things. Are the people in your life supportive of the growth that you are trying to do? Are the people in your life supportive of the person that you are, good, bad, and ugly? Do the spaces you occupy align with your values? Baby, this is a process. Boundaries take practice. And progress takes time. So I challenge you to start small, to honor your truth, whatever that is, and remind yourself boundaries are a form of self-care, and you definitely deserve that. So what's the cost of not having boundaries in your life? We've talked about what they are. We've talked about why they matter. But I really want to spend some time talking about what happens when we don't have any. Now, as I mentioned before, boundaries are often misunderstood as the walls that push people away. But in reality, remember, they're actually bridges that create balance. They help us protect our time, they help us protect our energy and our well-being, while also helping us maintain healthy relationships and a sense of self. Remember, I said that before. But let's face it, many of us struggle to set boundaries, and the cost of living without them can be staggering. I mentioned that having boundaries or setting boundaries has been something that has been difficult for me. I've had a season where I've been able to have really healthy boundaries with every single person in my life. And then I've had a season where I've let fear or I've let guilt or I've let some other reason or something prevent me from having the type of boundaries I need to have with people. And so when you don't set boundaries, the consequences don't just creep into your life, they actually take over. It adds another layer of stress. It adds another layer of overwhelmness. It puts you in a position to shrink yourself, right? So we talked about in the last episode how we shrink ourselves with people and in places. And a lot of times it's that fear, right? I said, I've had moments where I didn't maintain boundaries out of fear, right? It's the same thing. And so when we think about it, there's different things that can occur when you aren't setting boundaries, right? So let's say I am the person, and I think I mentioned this before. I am the person. I'm the strong friend. I'm there for everybody. I do all the things. Most people, when their perception of me is that I don't know how to be vulnerable. I don't have no feelings, and I got all the things. That's the funny thing. I have all the things, right? But when you are that person, a lot of times you end up not always having healthy boundaries. And when you don't have healthy boundaries, it brings about resentment, right? You start to feel bitter about the very commitments that you agreed to. You start to feel bitter about the very things that maybe in the beginning you truly enjoyed doing that you no longer enjoy doing or want to do anymore. And that bitterness can seep into the relationships, making even positive interactions feel strange, right? We always like to talk about people's energy and people don't good vibes, positive vibes. I'm a big believer of understanding the environments in which we function and operate and how do those environments impact that energy and those vibes, right? And so if you're in that space and you're not setting healthy boundaries in that space, then yeah, you may not have positive energy because you're in a place of resentment, because now you're feeling bitter about the commitments that you used to be super happy about doing, maybe in some cases, or maybe you never were happy, right? So always thinking about when you are in a place of resentment around something that you're doing, or is it possible that you don't have a healthy boundary in that space? The other thing that living without boundaries does is put us in a space of burnout. When you're constantly giving more than you have to give, it's only a matter of time before you hit a wall. Emotional and physical exhaustion becomes the norm for you. Is you don't have anything else to give. You are pouring and pouring and pouring, and your cup is empty and your cup hasn't been refilled. And so now you're at a place of burnout. The other thing that living without boundaries does is put us in a place of disconnection. Without boundaries, you're constantly pulled in different directions by other people's needs. This makes it easy to lose sight of your own values, your own goals, and your own identity. The next is it really can have some health consequences. Stress from overcommitment doesn't just affect your mood, it affects your body. Chronic stress can lead to anxiety, high blood pressure, or even serious illnesses over time. So really taking time to think about when I'm always stressed when I'm around this person, or every time this person calls me, I'm stressed because they want to ask me to do this or I need to do that. You really need to kind of take stock of that. That goes back to self-awareness isn't just about you and doing self-reflection for yourself. It's really that reflect that self-reflection of everything around you and all of the people around you. And what does that mean? The other thing that living without boundaries does is put you in a position to miss out on opportunities, because saying yes to everything leaves little room for things that truly matter. You may miss out on personal growth, meaningful relationships, or goals that you've put on the back burner because you're trying to be everything for everybody. So you have to learn how to balance that and how to get to a place of having healthy boundaries. So think about this. If you're constantly running on empty, how can you show up fully for the things and the people that matter the most? Boundaries are essential because they allow you to protect what's most important: your energy, your time, and your ability to live authentically. So how do you begin setting boundaries? Well, here's a quick little exercise that I call the boundary audit. The first thing I want you to do is identify a stress point. Write down one area in your life where you feel overextended: work, social commitments, or even your digital life. Like, hello, endless notifications. Phone is always popping. Next, I want you to name a boundary. Decide on one boundary you could set to protect your time or your energy in that particular area. Next, I want you to draft how you'll communicate that boundary clearly and respectfully. Now, this is where I think we struggle, because oftentimes we know what our stress point is. We know when we feel overextended. We know when we're doing the most and we're doing too much. And we know when we don't want to do a thing, right? So identifying the stress point, I don't think it's a problem for most of us. Even naming and deciding the boundary that we need to set to not have that stress point anymore, I think we equally know what that is and can name it, and probably have named it, have said it out loud to ourselves multiple times. The struggle, I think, that we have comes from the scripted part, this part. Draft how you'll communicate that boundary clearly and respectfully, right? That's the part that I think we struggle with. We can do the other two pieces, no problem. I can write it down. I can tell you what my problem is. We can tell you what our problems are all day long. Generally, we can tell you how to fix it. I got several problems right now. I know exactly how to fix it. It's that third one right there. How do you communicate that out loud, right? And so that's the place that we struggle, because depending on the dynamics of our relationships, we do not want to hurt people's feelings. We don't want people to think because I don't want to do a thing that I don't care, or that I don't love you, or I don't like my job, or whatever the case may be. But ultimately, it's stressing me out. I ain't got time to do that. I don't forget all of that. Forget the niceness pieces of it. I don't even really want to do it. Bottom line, I don't want to do it. I got time. I just don't want to do it. But we're not always comfortable setting those firm boundaries with certain people in our lives. And a lot of times with work, we feel like we have to do all the things, or we're not going to get the promotion, or we're not going to get the raise, or we're not going to be seen as someone that can handle all the things. But why I got to handle all the things? Why do I have to be the person that has to do all the things to make you see my value, or make me, or make it seem like I'm worth being in this place, or being near you, or talking to you? Why do I have to do all the things, right? And so those are all the things that we think about when we're talking about setting boundaries with people. But we want peace in our life. And peace starts with you. We create a false sense of peace when we're not communicating with people. When we don't communicate for the sake of peace, we are creating our own turmoil at the end of the day. The only person that's in peace is the person that's over there, not the person over here trying to maintain the peace for the person over there. So when we think about our boundaries and we're doing this boundary audit, and you're identifying your stress point, and you're naming your boundary, and you're writing out how you're going to communicate that boundary, especially if it's dealing with your job or family, friends, or spouse or partner, or whatever the case may be, you got to think about that dynamic. And why do you feel that you can't, no matter how well crafted your script is, you don't feel like you can communicate that boundary? Those are the type of things that we need to be thinking about, not just what a boundary is and how to set the boundary, because some boundaries are good, like my time and how I spend my time. Like if it was, let's say it was a work example, if work is bleeding into your personal life, right? Your boundary might be, I respond to emails during business hours, but after 6 o'clock, I'm offline unless it's something urgent, right? That may be a very simple thing to implement. Like for me, the simplest thing would be is to take my emails off my phone so that I'm not getting notifications every 5 minutes about emails that are coming in. Or if I have a work chat, cutting my work chat off after a certain period of time or muting it so that I don't hear it and then cut it back on when I go to work. Some of those things are easier to implement. I'm not going to be on social media as much. I'm not going to spend a lot of my time doing this or doing that. Those things are easy to implement. But when you're dealing with other people, when you got to people with the people and you have to be able to people with the people and then manage your emotions and their emotions about this thing that you don't want to do no more, especially if the person has an expectation that you're going to do that thing or if it's your job, that takes a lot out of you. And so you really got to get to the root of why you don't want to communicate that or why you don't feel like you can communicate that. But do a boundary audit and really think about, what are some areas where, you could have some better boundaries and you want to start small. You don't have to start really big. It's just start small and begin to work your way into a place where you are having healthy boundaries. So setting boundaries ultimately is an act of self-respect. It's about prioritizing your well-being so you can show up as the best version of yourself. When you take the time to protect your energy, you're not just improving your life, you're creating a space where you can thrive, right? Most of us have been on an airplane. When we get on the airplane, the stewardess, she does her thing, and she always tells us, the one thing they always tell us to do is put your mask on first before you put anybody else's mask on this plane. Even in a situation like that, the plane going down, they are telling you to take care of you first. But when we operate in our day-to-day lives, we put so many people before us. We don't prioritize us. And a lot of times we don't see setting boundaries as a form of prioritizing us and making ourselves important. Just as important as the people that we are saying yes to when we really want to say no. So what I want you to think about is what's one boundary you can set today and implement. And that's your first step in really getting to a place where you are living with boundaries instead of living without boundaries. Okay, so now we're in the home stretch. We've talked about what boundaries are. We've talked about the cost of living without boundaries. Now we're talking about strategy. So we're talking all strategy because knowing about boundaries is one thing, but living #the boundary life, that's where the actual transformation begins. So let's dive right into strategy. So I'm going to start with sharing a few gems from the book, Set Boundaries, Find Peace. I will link the book and the workbook that goes along with the book in the show notes. This is a book that I recommend to my leadership team, that I've recommended to folks that I've coached, as well as family and friends. It's a book that I have personally used for the last year. I've read it twice, and I utilize that workbook to work through things because I do think that book can be a resource and an essential guide to reclaiming #the boundary life if you're struggling with boundaries. But what I do want to add is what I want to challenge us all to do is to be proactive in all of this stuff that we're doing, right? So if life is great for you and life is not lifing for you and you have healthy boundaries, you're living authentically, you're doing all the things, I still challenge you to do the activities, to get the resources, because let's maintain that stuff. Let's be proactive instead of reactive, right? So if I work out on a regular basis, that puts me in a position to be healthy, right? But if I get sick and then I go to the doctor and the doctor says, hey, you need to start working out, now I'm being reactive when if I worked out the whole time, I may not have ended up at the doctor's office to begin with. Have the same type of mindset when you're thinking about your mental health, your emotional stability, your spiritual life, your mindset, all of those things. Make sure that you're being proactive in trying to ensure that even though you may be in a great space, there is always a possibility that you may not remain in that space. So you want to already have the resources and the strategies to be able to work an issue when an issue becomes a problem for you. So, but first, before we jump into some of those, so let me back up for a second. Get the book and the workbook, whether you have healthy boundaries or not. Be proactive instead of reactive. Okay, now I can move on. So it's crucial to understand the quality of your boundaries. So in the book, she breaks that down. She breaks boundaries down into 3 categories. She has it as healthy boundaries, rigid boundaries, and porous boundaries. So healthy boundaries are those boundaries that strike a balance. They're clear, they're firm, and respectful. They allow you to prioritize your needs while also maintaining meaningful relationships. So, for example, when you're expressing, hey, I'm not available tonight, but let's plan something for next week, that allows you to set the boundary, but also preserve the connection. A lot of times we say yes instead of saying no because we feel that if we say no, it's going to jeopardize the connection that we have with that person. But this is a way to preserve that connection if you're in a space to where it's a no right now, but it could be a yes later on, right? The next one is the rigid boundaries. These create walls that keep everyone out, often as a self-protective mechanism. So, for example, refusing to let anyone help you or share personal stories about you may signal that you have overly rigid boundaries. While they may prevent harm, they can also limit connection and support. So, if you're not one to share a lot, like people that know me, no, if you don't ask, I don't tell. I don't always do a lot of sharing. That can be classified as a rigid boundary, right? And so understanding the why, I have to understand the why behind that and why I choose to make that. Am I limiting connections? And ultimately, do I care about those connections that I'm limiting if I'm not willing to share? So that's something that you have to kind of work through and process. The next is around porous boundaries. These are overly loose and allow others to take advantage of you. So signs of porous boundaries include saying yes when you want to say no. Oversharing. I don't think people feel or understand that oversharing is a form of having overly loose boundaries. But a lot of times we do that because of spaces that we're in, right? So being able to recognize that is important. Then feeling responsible for other people's emotions based off of setting the boundary. So if I set the boundary, if I say no, then they're going to be upset or they're going to respond negatively. It's not your responsibility to be responsible for somebody else's feelings or how they respond to something. They are responsible for how they regulate their own emotions, right? Porous boundaries often lead to burnout and resentment. Remember earlier, we talked about the cost of living without boundaries. When you're always doing for people, when you're always pouring into other people, when you're always saying yes when you really want to say no, when you're doing stuff that you have no energy for, no time for, no desire to do the thing, right? It leads to burnout, but it also leads to resentment. There have been instances and times where I've had porous boundaries with people and I can see the resentment every time I interact with that person because I don't have good boundaries. I'm doing a bunch of stuff that I really don't want to do, but I am probably taking on responsibility of how they may respond, even potentially not really knowing how they may respond, but making an assumption about how they may respond. And so then I don't even really want to deal with you no more. So understanding the 3 categories and the quality of your boundaries is just as crucial to your understanding the boundaries that you need to put in place. Now, here are some strategies from the book. Start small. I mentioned that already, right? Boundaries don't need to be monumental to be impactful. You can begin with one manageable area. Maybe it's declining extra responsibilities at work or carving out a quiet moment in your day. Just finding some time to yourself and saying, hey, 5 minutes, 10 minutes before I start getting dressed, I'm going to do this thing. Or before I start my day, I'm going to do this thing. Or if someone says, hey, do you feel like you can be on this committee? I don't have the capacity for that right now. So start small. Use I statements. Ground your boundaries in self-ownership. So take ownership of the boundaries that you're setting. So try saying things like, I need time to decompress after work before diving into conversations. This approach is clear, firm, and rooted in self-respect. The next one is anticipate pushback. When you start setting boundaries with people who you haven't had any boundaries with, especially if you had porous boundaries with those individuals, honey, you are challenging the status quo that they know. And not everybody's going to cheer you on You're going to get some pushback. You're going to have some folk that don't understand why you changing. What's going on? What happened? Why are you changing? But what you have to do is stay anchored in your why. And that's because you're protecting your peace, your energy, and ultimately your authenticity. So be okay with the pushback. Challenge the status quo that they know. And if they don't cheer you on, that's okay. It's all right. Everybody not going to be happy with everything that we do all the time. It's okay. We already talked about knowing the types of boundaries. So you have the physical boundaries. I don't like hugs. Don't touch me. 6 feet. Protecting your personal space and your physical well-being. Those emotional boundaries. I really can't discuss that right now. Can't discuss that topic right now. Safeguard your feelings and your emotional energy. Those time-based. Look, I need 30 minutes of myself every morning when I come to work. I don't want any meetings on my calendar. I don't really want a whole bunch of people coming in my office. I need some time to decompress. Material. I can't lend money out right now. So that's managing how you share or protect your possessions. So those are some strategies and some stuff that I pull from the book. Now let me layer in a few of my own strategies for living boldly and unapologetically. So one of the things that I had to do was recognize my patterns. I really had to take some time to reflect on where my boundaries tended to blur. And what I learned was that for me, it was with family and close friends, and those relationships where love and obligation intertwined with one another. So those romantic relationships. So recognizing that has been a game changer for me because it's allowed me to approach certain moments with clarity and intention, because now I know with certain family members, with certain close friends, and especially when I'm in romantic relationships, I can have either rigid boundaries or porous boundaries. They're not always the healthy boundaries, right? But it's that self-reflection and that self-awareness and being able to recognize your patterns. That was why I love the activity in the workbook where she had you think about your family, your close friends, romantic partners, and made you talk about the type of boundaries that you have with those individuals and why you have the type of boundaries that you have, because that was one hell of a boundary audit for me, to be honest. And it really did help me recognize some of my patterns to begin shifting and changing when it came to my boundaries. The other thing was practicing saying no. Saying no isn't just a boundary, it's an act of self-preservation. And starting with something small, like turning down a low stakes request, because each no builds your confidence and strengthens your resolve. So really getting to a place with being comfortable with just saying, yeah, nah, it's a no for me. I can't do that. I don't want to do that. No. And being okay with that. The next thing for me was embracing the power of pausing. Before saying yes to something out of just habit of just saying, yeah, I'll do that, or guilt, now when somebody asks me something, can I do something? I really kind of take a pause and I ask myself, like, do I have time for this? Do I have the energy for this right now? Does it even align with what I value at the end of the day? And those simple acts of mindfulness can make all the difference when you're making your decision and whether or not you're going to maintain a healthy boundary in that space. Lastly, I want to talk about one of the things I do is celebrate every victory. So I believe that you should always celebrate your wins, your big and your small wins. We always like to celebrate the grandiose things. You should celebrate every victory. Honoring your boundaries, no matter how small, is worth celebrating. Did you say no without over-explaining? That's a win. Celebrate. Did you leave a situation that drained you? That's a win. Celebrate. Recognize these moments because they're building blocks of your boundary masterpiece. Now, the truth of the matter is that we don't hear enough. Guilt in this situation is normal. It's a byproduct of breaking patterns that no longer serve you. But this is what I need you to remember. Guilt, that's a visitor. It's not a roommate. So acknowledge it, learn from it, but don't let it take up permanent residence in your house. Living hashtag the boundary life isn't easy, but I promise you it is so worth it. It has been a double Dutch journey for me. It will constantly be a journey for me, but it's a journey so worth it. It's a journey worth going on, because when you set boundaries, you're not just protecting your peace, you are creating a life that you truly deserve. Really think about the boundaries that you don't set with your workplace, your family, your friends, your spouse, your partner, whomever. And what does that do to you? Are you always over-explaining? Are you always stressed? Are you burnt out? Are you disconnected from yourself because you're so worried about other people? You are pouring into everybody's cup. All right, y'all, we've covered a lot today. We talked about what boundaries are, why they matter, and how to start practicing them in a way that protects your peace and supports your journey towards living hashtag the boundary life. Now, here's your homework or challenge for the week. I want you to pick one area of your life. It can be work, family, or personal time. Then I want you to set a boundary. Use the phrases that we talked about, like I'm not available for that right now, or I need some time to think about this. And then try the boundary audit. See how it feels to honor your truth and take that step towards living authentically. Now, next week, we're diving into freedom and empowerment. We'll explore how living authentically and setting healthy boundaries can help you reclaim your time, make aligned decisions, and find joy in the space you've created for yourself. It's all about learning how to thrive in the life you've intentionally designed, so don't miss it. But until then, remember this. Boundaries aren't about keeping people out. They're about creating space for the people and the things that matter the most. Protect your peace, honor your values, and keep showing up as your authentic self. I'm Keisha. I'm your guide. I'm your host. But I just might be your accountability partner at the end of this. This is The Authentic Life, and I'll see you next time. Well, folks, the episode has come to an end. Thank you for hanging out with me on The Authentic Life. If you loved today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, because subscribing is just like an instant invite to more fun, to more inspiration, and to more authentic vibes. I could also use a review, so leave a review or share this with someone that you feel needs a little inspiration. But whatever you do, let's spread the joy of the authentic life. Remember this, your authentic self is your greatest gift to the world, and no one should ever make you feel like you aren't. Until next time, stay true, stay bold, and keep living the authentic life. Peace, love, and blessings from your girl, Keisha.